Hi friends, in today's video, I'm making poor man's meals. I'm focusing on dishes with just a few ingredients that can be thrown together quickly. Today, I have 3 meals. The first is a meal that I discovered by using leftovers. Another dish is a one-pot meal, and then I have a third dish, which is a peasant dish from the southern region of Italy. And the first dish I wanted to share with you is one that I discovered quite by accident, just by using up some leftover ingredients. I have these perfectly seasoned leftover mashed potatoes. I was thinking about what I could make with these, and I was thinking of those cumin tacos that I love so much, but this time I've got some flour tortillas, so I was thinking I would try making a mashed potato quesadilla. There are all kinds of things that you could add into this mix, but for the first one, I think I just want the main ingredient to be mashed potatoes. You could also just put a small amount on each tortilla and then roll that up and make potato taquitos. And then I'll just sprinkle this with some cumin to the amount that I think I'll like. And it already is perfectly seasoned because these are actually some instant mashed potatoes. And so they're perfectly seasoned with butter and salt and pepper. This would be good on its own, but I do have some pepper jack, so I'm just going to add a very small amount to this and see what that turns out like. For someone that's in an emergency situation and they are very low on funds, I think that a pack of flour tortillas is a good purchase because there are so many things that you can make with them. I just made this salsa earlier with a can of tomatoes, some garlic, onions, cilantro, and canned green chilies. But this would be good with some Louisiana hot sauce. You could have sprinkled that into the mashed potatoes and that would have been delicious, or you could just add it to the top. I also like the idea of a fresh Roma tomato cut up and eaten along with this, just to add the extra acidity. Even one Roma tomato diced very small would go a long way as a topping for this quesadilla. Or you could make your own pico de gallo with tomatoes, onions, jalapenos, and cilantro. And if the cilantro is on sale, then I could make that for less than $1 in my area, but it might be a little more expensive where you live. Hopefully it's still a very affordable option. And I do like the idea of serving this with a small side of whole pinto beans, just to add some protein and fiber to the meal. And of course you could always add beans into the mashed potatoes, but I did want to try this with just the cumin mashed potatoes because they are so fluffy and delicious, and I love them in the tacos so much, and I really enjoyed them in the quesadilla as well. I think I overstuffed this just a small amount, and the cheese, as you could see, kind of melted into this. It is a nice flavor, but I think I would like it just as well without the pepper jack cheese. So maybe next time I'll just make it with just the mashed potatoes. But really what I like so much about this is that fluffy texture of the potatoes against the crispiness of the shell. I will say that my all-time favorite is still with the corn shell. And you could also make a quesadilla with the corn shell, which would probably end up being my favorite because I like the crunchiness that you get with the corn tortilla. You get a crunchiness with this tortilla as well. It's kind of like a soft crunch, if that makes any sense. But anyway, definitely delicious, and you should try it if you need something to make with those leftover mashed potatoes. For my next meal, I'm making a one-pot dish that includes cannellini beans and also a can of tomatoes. And you'll also need some type of sausage for this dish. And I happen to have this one. I'm only using a small amount, but you can also use vegan sausage here. Or if you wanted to go to the meat counter and just get a small amount from them, you could do that as well, because you don't need a lot for this dish. But pretty much use whatever your favorite kind of sausage is. You could also substitute in some hot dogs here or some chicken sausage. That would work as well. But ideally, you would have a fatty sausage here. And I'm just cutting this into bite-sized pieces. Now I'm going to cook 2 diced cloves of garlic in this oil. If you don't have garlic, then you can obviously just add garlic powder later into the mix, and that's fine. But since I have it, I went ahead and added that in here. You could also use some onions if you want. So I originally got the idea for this from a viewer that makes this at home, and this is like a go-to dinner for her. And actually, I've made something very, very similar in the past, but I am going off of her recipe here. And I wasn't sure whether I should drain the cannellini beans or not, so I just took a little bit of the liquid out. You can always set that aside and add back in later if you need more liquid. And then while that's simmering, I'm going to make some croutons with some bread that I have. You can just use regular bread, but I just happen to have this French bread, so I'm going to use this to make some large croutons. And this is actually garlic bread that I had purchased. But again, any bread will work. Actually, the denser the bread, the better. So that one recipe that I made with the yeast-free bread would make some perfect croutons. But use whatever is easiest. And then I'm just going to cube this up, and then I'm going to put this in the air fryer to get this crispy. And then we're going to top our stew with these croutons. And I'm also making some pieces of bread here to go along with a soup that I made for my lunch today. So just ignore that part. And my viewer didn't say that she added any seasonings in here, but I felt like it did need some seasoning, so I added some garlic powder, some black pepper, and some basil. And you might ask why I'm adding garlic powder if I've already added garlic, fresh garlic into this dish. And I do frequently do that just because I do love garlic so much. But you don't have to. Use whatever your favorite seasonings are here. And I also do feel that the ratio of tomatoes to beans is a little bit off for my taste. So I'm taking out a few of the pieces of tomato. I was thinking if you're making a big pot of this for a family, then you could use, 1 can of tomatoes and like 3 cans of beans or 2 cans of beans. And then I think it would be perfect. Or ideally at that point, you're using dry beans. But I just wanted the ratio to be right for my taste. So I took out some of these, and then I'm going to use those in a different recipe. So for my taste, I think about a half can of tomatoes to 1 can of cannellini beans is the perfect ratio. And then you can add some liquid back in from the bean broth or some water to thin this out to the consistency that you want, which is what I did. And unfortunately, my camera wasn't on when I did it. And then also you want to add a little bit of salt to taste, just so that this is seasoned perfectly. But this is the consistency that I'm looking for my dish. And I like to plate my stews in a wide bowl. And I've had this parsley in my fridge forever, so I'm just going to cut up a few pieces of this to garnish my dish with. I love this dish though because it is so fast to put together and it's super affordable. This is one of those kind of recipes you want to make during weeknight when you really don't feel like cooking. You just throw these into the pan and you're done in like 15 minutes. Okay, my croutons are nice and brown. So that's going to give this recipe some much needed texture, and it's just going to take this dish to the next level. And my viewer poured some extra virgin olive oil over the top of this. I'm actually using avocado oil, but you can use whatever you want. And then I'm just garnishing with my chopped parsley, which is completely optional. All right, I'm going to go ahead and try this with just the tomatoes and the beans first. And this is really delicious, but then again, I've always known that I've loved that combination of white beans with tomatoes. Sometimes I like to make a big pot of navy beans and add a can of tomatoes in there, and it's just so delicious. And then I was pushing the croutons down in there into the liquid because you do want to have them kind of half submerged into this so that part of them are crispy and then part are kind of chewy. And so that's what I'm going to try in this next bite. And yeah, it's hard to believe that this is a meal that's so quick to make and so inexpensive. It is delicious. I love this meal. It's perfectly balanced. You have the creaminess of the beans, the acidity of the tomatoes, the fattiness of that sausage, and then the croutons just pull it all together. It's amazing what you can do with bread. It's such an inexpensive add-on, but it really elevates your soups and stews. For my last meal, I'm making spaghetti with pangrattato, and pangrattato means breadcrumbs, and this is a dish that came out of southern Italy. I've seen this dish made very simply with just spaghetti and breadcrumbs, and I've seen it very gourmet with breadcrumbs and anchovies or breadcrumbs and cheese. So you can use this recipe as a springboard for your own creativity, but today we're just making the simple version. And I've just got some plain white bread and I've got a couple of cloves of garlic, but if you have garlic powder you can use that as well. And for the bread, I'm going to make a rough cut on some of this. And then for the remainder, I'm going to throw a piece and a half of this bread into the blender until I get these very smooth breadcrumbs. And I'm cooking my spaghetti in heavily salted water, and I'm using a wide cooking pan just to concentrate the starch into that, because I want to have a little bit of sauce with this so that it's not a completely dry spaghetti. And I do always weigh out my spaghetti, and I'm eating more than a serving size, which is just over 3 ounces. That'll be fine. And then I'm going to cook this until it's al dente, which on the Barilla box is, they have the perfect time. I think it's 10 to 11 minutes. And so I'll start checking it at 10 minutes. And then I'm just going to get my ingredients ready to go. Use whatever the best oil that you have is. If you have olive oil, then use that. And if you have a little bit of butter, it's going to really make these breadcrumbs taste amazing if you add just a bit of butter into this mixture. as you're toasting these. Earlier I was talking about how some recipes use anchovies in this, and the New York Times has a recipe for that has almost 1,000 5-star reviews, and it calls for adding in some mashed up anchovies into the breadcrumbs at this stage. And anchovies are actually great for budget cooking. I found this anchovy paste for only $2, and you can get a small can of the whole anchovies for $2.33, and it only takes a very small amount. And in case you missed it, I added some garlic salt in here, but you want to add any herbs that you want into this mixture. But for me, I'm just adding garlic salt, and I'm going to go ahead and taste this. And I realize I do need to add a little bit more. In the New York Times recipe, they also added some fish sauce to the noodles when they cooked them in the pan. It was highly rated, so I thought I'd mention it in case you guys wanted to check that out. But there's lots of different ways you can go with this. I've also seen people add lemon to this dish, which if you've been watching my channel for a long time, you've probably seen me make lemon spaghetti before. You just squeeze some lemon into the starch water, and I can see how lemon would be a nice offset to the richness of these breadcrumbs. You can also add some Parmesan cheese or Pecorino Romano. And I was going to say about the anchovies, I know the anchovies are delicious. There are so many different things you can make with that anchovy paste, which makes it really excellent to have for budget cooking. Lots of times you can add that to soups or many different kinds of sauces that sometimes you can't quite put your finger on it, but the anchovy paste is the magic ingredient that makes a dish taste so good. So I don't know. Let me know if you guys can think of anything else that would be great in here that I'm not mentioning. And then I'm adding this to the pan. Again, if you have some butter, then obviously you can add a little in there. But I'm adding this in with some starch water and the spaghetti, and that's going to make a sauce. And it's really just a garlic sauce at this point. And if you watch this, you can see the starch water literally is starting to absorb into the spaghetti and start to coat the spaghetti. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't have a dry spaghetti. You always want slightly more liquid than you think you'll need because it will be absorbed. And the noodles will be perfectly seasoned already because I had that heavily salted water that I boiled the spaghetti in. So this would be a perfectly tasty meal even without the addition of the breadcrumbs. But we're going to add this to the top, and it's going to give it just a little bit of extra something something and a little bit of texture as well. And I already have some chopped parsley in the fridge, so I thought I would just add a little bit to the top of this just to add some color. And I really should have chopped this finer because the flavor of this noodle is very delicate, and fresh parsley can be a little overpowering. But it is Friday night and I'm in a rush to get dinner made. All right, I'm excited to try this. I'm actually always excited to try a new spaghetti dish because I love spaghetti so much. And this is delicious, just as I expected that it would be. The addition of the breadcrumbs just adds another textural element and a little bit of extra garlicky saltiness to the dish that just kind of makes it pop. I will say that the last time I made breadcrumbs, I did a better job on them. And I think I used a little bit more seasonings. These are a little milder than the last ones. I was trying to find the footage of a cauliflower pasta dish that I made where I had used breadcrumbs in that because I remembered that those were perfect. But I do think if you add a little bit of butter, that's going to add some really great flavor to this as well. This is a great recipe to play around with and perfect and kind of make it your own. I know that I'm going to be doing that with this dish in the future. Thanks so much for watching, friends. I know your time is valuable, so I do appreciate that you choose to spend it with me. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next Sunday.
Morning has broken, my windows are open. Wanna feel the wind blow through my hair. Which way do I follow?